This is the Show Up Show, helping coaches, service providers, leaders, and entrepreneurs to master showing up to build their brand, authority, and grow their business. Whether it's showing up on social media, in front of an audience, on a live interview, or an actual stage, this podcast is going to help you overcome visibility fear to confidently brand yourself as the authority in your industry. I'm Joanne Chan, aka the Confidence and Visibility Queen, and I am on a mission to share how I went from a nobody to the confident leader I am today, what I have learned, and what I have done to build my brand and business from scratch, and help you do the same so that you can make an impact in the world with the meaningful work that you do. Whether you are new to the business world or feeling unsure about public visibility, or you want to be seen and heard in a way that doesn't feel icky but authentic to you, you will discover how to become visible in your own unique way and show up as the confident entrepreneur you have always dreamed about becoming. Now, it's time to get you show up and be confidently visible so you can easily attract more clients and opportunities for yourself. Joining us today is one of the most highly sought after podcasting coaches and content creators in the industry. Since 2014, he has been making himself a household name within the podcasting industry, speaking on stages of national and global trade events and hosting shows that reach the top 1.5% of podcasts and being named to Podcast Magazine's 40 over 40 in podcasting. With technology and media changing faster than many can hit play, he has committed to staying at the forefront of the industry. He's seen as a thought leader in the AI space, teaching workshops and hosting speaking engagements to help creators utilize new technology, and will continue to push businesses and business owners out of their comfort zone and into a chapter of innovation and growth. So guys, help me welcoming the Chief Creative Officer of Red Hat Media, Larry Roberts.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity.
Love that. But the first question that I have for you is something that I'm really curious about. And I asked a similar question to another guest earlier. I'm sure you know him as well. His name is Jason Bernard, and he always wears a red shirt. So why are you always wear a red hat then?
Yeah, it's a funny story, and it was an accident, to be honest with you.
Okay.
The red hat has actually become my brand, and it made such an impact that I had to recognize the fact that because of the red hat, people recognize me. And it came about in, what is this, 20? Are we in 23? Where are we at? We're in
Yeah.
20. It came about at the end of 21, about November of 2021. I was speaking at an event in Tampa, Florida. It was called Podfest Origins. And a friend of mine, Alex Sanfilippo, he's the owner of Podmatch, we give each other a hard time when we come off stage. We typically speak at the same events very often, and we like to kind of rib each other and give each other a hard time. And I came down off stage, and he goes, "Hey, bro, great speech, blah blah blah. But let me ask you this." He goes, "Why are you wearing a Supreme hat?" Now, at the time, I was wearing a red hat that was Supreme brand. If you're not familiar with the brand, it's literally everything they have is red, and it's just white block letters that says Supreme. And I said, "Hey, man, what I was doing was trying to relate to a younger demographic in the audience because, well, I'm a little older than most people think, and I was trying to relate to, some of those young folks out there." And that's why I was wearing that Supreme hat. And he goes, "You know what, dude? I love what you're doing and why you're doing it, but unless they're paying you, you need to be rocking your brand." And it's hard to tell here on Zoom, but I'm about 6'4" and I'm about 240 pounds. So I'm a big guy. I have a big presence about me. And he goes, "I love the red hat because it's like a beacon. You're already tall, you're already loud, and you put that red hat on and you really stand out in a crowd. So I love the red hat, but the Supreme thing, it's really not working." So what I did was I went home after that conference and I tossed that $100 Supreme hat to the side, and I went on Amazon and I bought a $6 unbranded red hat, and it literally changed my life. It was insane. People started recognizing me as the red hat guy,
Mm,
and I was known in the industry as, you know, it's funny because a lot of people don't know my name, but they know the red hat guy knows podcasting. So if they have a podcast question, they find me. And it was really apparent that following, I think it was March, I went to Bitcoin Miami in, well, Miami, Florida, and it was 35,000 people were at this conference over the course of 3 days. And during that 3 days, multiple people that I didn't know found me in that audience. Goes, oh, you're the podcast guy, right? Oh, hey, I've been looking for you. I want to ask you about a podcast. So when that happened, not 5 months later, I was blown away, and I knew that the red hat had to be my brand.
that is what an amazing story. Now I start to think, maybe I need to, also find something, maybe a purple hat or a purple shirt, things like that to brand myself so people will recognize me because my favorite color is purple. That makes sense, right? So
Well, I got to tell you, my favorite color is not red. I don't even really like red. you know,
okay.
I'm a blue guy. I'm sitting here in a blue hoodie. I love blue, but I just happened, that Supreme hat just happened to be red. So I ended up as, well, the red hat guy.
And
So
you
it,
name your company the Red Hat Media as well.
I had to because, like I said, 5 months after that, which was March of last year, I saw such an impact from wearing the red hat that I was like, oh my God, this is insane. People, again, they don't necessarily know my name, but they know what I do. They know that I help people either launch or grow podcasts. And when you have that recognition, uh, because of a brand or because of your reputation, whatever it may be, you have to embrace that. You have to run with it. And the red hat was doing it for me. So I had to be the red hat guy.
Yeah, I love that. I would love to talk more about like personal branding. How do you build that?
Sure.
But I know your expertise is really to help businesses create their own podcast and grow their podcast. And I want to first, so that was the first question. The second question that I have, because we were talking earlier about your story, and I really want to know your story. Like, because when I was doing my research, reading your bio, I know that you actually you left the company, that you worked for like 21 years, and
Yeah.
podcasting actually helped you to quit a job, I believe. So talk to us about that story and that journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild because I fell in love with podcasting in 2014, which is, quite a ways back.
Was it really
Um,
a
uh,
thing back then, podcasting?
it actually podcasting actually started in 2004. So it was a quote unquote thing, but it really wasn't a thing for me. And a friend of mine that I worked with back in corporate, he was like, dude, you got to listen to this podcast. You got to listen to this podcast. And I'm like, man, I don't have time to listen to podcasts. Those are cheesy. Nobody listens to those. You know what? I was way too cool to listen to a podcast, right? But eventually he taught me into listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, which, well, go figure. And I listened to that podcast, and on that particular episode, there were two comedians. It was Joey Diaz and it was Tony Hinchcliffe. And I grew up in the 80s, and comedy in the 80s was a little different than we see comedy today. It was much more, how do we say it? Blue. Well, in the comedy world, they call it blue. There were some naughty words and there were some naughty topics and that sort of thing. And these comedians, they were telling jokes like it was the 80s again. I was like, oh my God, I can tell these jokes and not get in trouble, which was kind of a cool thing because my mouth has a tendency to get me in trouble from time to time. But when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, this podcasting thing, this is so cool. So I immediately jumped into podcasting and tried to figure out, how do I start my own show? And my very first podcast was a comedy podcast. And I partnered with an open mic comic, which is in comic terms, that's an amateur comic here in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex. And we started a show. And man, the show grew like you would not believe. It was, we were getting thousands and thousands of downloads per episode on this show. We ended up taking it to a live stage show, and eventually that live stage show turned into an open mic for comics here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And eventually it worked its way into being the largest open mic for comics in all of Dallas Fort Worth.
Wow.
outside of a comedy club. So, and it all started from the podcast, and that was crazy. It was unbelievable to experience that growth and that type of reception.
Mm.
But I was still in corporate America, and in corporate, maybe some of the topics we were covering on the podcast weren't necessarily acceptable to corporate standards. So I eventually got that knock on my office door that said, "Hey, man, let's go
Oh,
to HR
sorry.
and talk about this podcast that you have." So I got called in there, and the thing was is even the podcast, the name was a bit of an innuendo. It was a bit of a joke in and of itself, and people at the office were fans of the show, and they were wearing my merch to the office. And so they're wearing very inappropriate merch for a professional environment. And of course, it all came back on me. So they said, "Hey, here's the scene. We love you. You're doing a great job, but either it's the podcast or your position." So I had to step away from that show. And my partner Jamie Gravitt, he's an amazing comedian. He's had a residency in Las Vegas at the New Sahara, opening for Eddie Griffin. He's doing amazing things down in the Austin comic scene down there. His career blossomed, and it all started with the podcast. But for me personally, I had to kind of change gears. I had to get things a little cleaned up. So I knew I still wanted to podcast, and I knew I still wanted to be a part of the podcasting industry. So I started a show called Readily Random.
Okay.
Now, that's a horrible name. It's a
Yeah.
horrible name for a podcast because no one knows what the heck that means. What is that? What does that even mean? And back then when I started it, I had no idea what to do with a podcast. I had no idea how to market a podcast. I had no idea that we had to start a podcast for a particular audience and
Mm.
ideally in a particular niche. So I didn't know what I was doing, but I just knew I wanted to podcast. So I started that show, and that show I kept interviewing just random people because again it was readily random. So I interviewed people that were, I mean, I've interviewed NFL football players, I've interviewed Netflix series stars, and I guess one of the pinnacles was I'm a huge fan of origami. I love origami personally.
Uh-huh.
That's a little insight into Larry there. And I interviewed an MIT professor. He's a professor at MIT of mathematics, and he's also the American expert on origami. He's one of the top origami artists in the world.
Wow.
Um, and while that was fascinating to me, nobody else seemed to care. So, so I had to understand that
Oh,
while it
that's
was
good.
great for, I wasn't delivering any value to my audience, and I didn't understand that at the time. So, over the years, I started understanding the podcast industry, and things started to evolve. And then I ended up with my podcast that I have today called "You're the Boss," and it's all about entrepreneurship and how to be an entrepreneur and how to leverage your passions to grow your business and basically fulfill your goals. So that's where we're at today.
I love that. So eventually you did leave the company, right? And pursue your podcast passions. And okay, I want to talk about one thing because nowadays, because you talk about, back then you were too cool for podcasts, right? To listen to podcasts. But now I think many people think that having a podcast is like it's a cool thing to have a podcast, right? Podcasts are just cool people, they have a podcast. And so how do podcasts, let's talk about like serious business, right? How do podcasts
Yeah.
contribute to building a better branding for yourself as an entrepreneur or businesses or, and create brand awareness?
Yeah, 100%, man. I think today, here we are.
Yeah.
We're what, 10 years into the game, 20 years into the game almost. Uh Podcasts have gotten to the point where you kind of have to have one, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Uh, it provides credibility to you and your business. It gives you an opportunity to demonstrate your thought leadership in your space. And it's really just, it's almost like a reference. If people are looking to do business with you, or they're looking to become your client, they can look at your podcast and they can decide whether or not your thought leadership in your particular niche or your particular space applies to what they're trying to do. We see podcasts literally everywhere,
Yeah.
and the bigger brands, they all have a podcast, and it tells their story. As human beings, we all love stories. We relate to stories because we've all experienced our own story, right? So our relationship with stories goes beyond just a buying decision or an investment decision. And a podcast allows you to structure your business and your story in a way that can relate back to your ideal client. And that's where podcasting plays such a dramatic role and such a critical role in everything we do today. I hear a lot. I probably hear it every day in that the podcast space is saturated.
Yeah.
There's so many podcasts out there. Well, let's take a look at YouTube. Okay. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of YouTube channels out there. And they're all making an impact. They're all helping these individual business owners. And if we look at YouTube as compared to podcasts, it's not even remotely the same comparison. At that last count, there was about 2.5 million podcasts that were out there. And of that 2.5 million, less than 20% of those 2.5 million podcasts were even active, meaning that someone has released an episode in the last 90 days. So less than 20% of 2.5 million are even producing content. So podcasts right now are an amazing opportunity for you to get your brand, your message, and your story out to your audience.
Mm, I love that. Yeah, it's one thing that I always say as well. I always say it out loud on my podcast. Like everyone has a podcast now, and the question that I had for the guests, I mean, previously was like, how do you stand out then? And so how do you? I will ask you a different question because it's
Sure.
all about helping them to grow their podcast. How do we really get to the top, like top 1%, top 5%, instead of just like like the small podcasters that just try and release the content once a month? How do we get to the top?
Well, I think you nailed it right there. You said, as compared to the podcasters that release content once a month. Consistency is the key to everything we do. We have to be able to create content consistently. If we have a podcast, we have to create those episodes consistently. We have to stay on top of our audience. We have to know what our audience wants and respond to that audience in a consistent basis. It's not uncommon for somebody to start a podcast and then after 3 to 5, maybe 7 episodes, they fall off. They stop recording, they stop producing their podcast. And consistency, that is the number one differentiator from one podcast to another, is that you continue along the path. Back when I started my podcast, regardless of the name, regardless of what I was doing, if I didn't show up every day, if I didn't show up every week and record that episode and produce that content, I would have fallen out of favor with everybody. Nobody would know who the red hat guy is.
Yeah.
But I continue to show up every day, every week, every month, every year, and people recognize the fact that I'm there because I show up each and every day. That's the difference between a successful podcast and a not so successful podcast.
I love that. Yeah, consistency is key in everything you do, even just when it comes to like creating content for social media, not necessarily, having a podcast, but just like creating content. If you post once a month, nobody's gonna know you, right? Um,
Right.
and you show to your audience that you are really serious at what you're doing, right? You are serious about your craft, your work, your message, your business. But what are some of the best practices for podcasters, right, to really expand our reach and really attract new audiences, I would say, because we do have existing, like followers or audience, but how do we attract new audiences? How do we put in ourselves in front of new people every single day?
Yeah, I think we're still on the same note there. We're still in the consistency realm. We find new people because we show up every day. And if we're showing up on social media every day, the algorithm's going to start demonstrating us to different people. We're going to start showing up in other people's feeds. Um, One of the ways that I personally found the most success was networking. I hate to say it, but word of mouth is one of the greatest ways that we can grow our show and grow our influence. I highly recommend that everybody get involved with their local community, whether it's a chamber of commerce, whether it's a networking organization, whatever it may be. That's going to open tremendous doors for you. But aside from that, One of the things that I saw too that helped me over the years was going live. Experiment with different audiences. If we produce a podcast, we're going to attract one particular audience, an audience that consumes content on a regular basis, but it's pre-recorded. One of the things that I did back in, man, I want to say it was 2019. I was scared to go on camera. I was afraid of the camera, actually. So one of the things that I did to overcome that was I forced myself to go live on Facebook for a month.
Wow.
And I made this commitment to every day I was going to go live. And my goal was to get 10 minutes in. That's what I named the episodes, literally was 10 minutes in, because my goal was to get 10 minutes in on camera. And I would go live on Facebook. I had some cards that were, I think they were little affirmation cards that, the little phrases that made us feel good about ourselves. And I would take one of those cards, and that would be the topic for my 10 minutes in, and I would go live on Facebook. And I don't know if you've ever been live on Facebook, but if you do go live on Facebook, you can look up in that top left-hand corner and you can see
Yeah.
exactly how many people are watching. And I got to tell you, when it's a zero, that sucks. But we have to continue to do that. We have to look up there and see that there's a zero, but we have to keep going forward because eventually, my goal was to only do it for a month, but I
Mm,
ended up doing it for months, plural, roughly about 6 months.
mm.
And there was a time that I went from zero to 100 to 150 to over 200 people watching live on my little 10 minutes in episodes. So I highly recommend that you mix up the way that you deliver the content. Deliver your content with your podcast, deliver it in your social media, deliver it live, mix things up and give people an opportunity to see you in different arenas. And I think you'll see tremendous results from that.
Well, I love that. I think that is like the biggest takeaway for my listeners today because most of my listeners, as I shared with you, before that I'm a visibility coach and confidence coach, and people come to me because they are having fear of visibility, right? They are afraid to
Yeah.
go on the camera, they are afraid to do live. So it just give them like the best tip ever to go live every day just for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? If you can't do 10, then do five, and just talk about anything, right? Just pick a topic, talk
It,
about
it
weather, talk
doesn't
about your
matter.
that's what.
Exactly. It doesn't matter. Just have that discipline to get in front of the camera and go through the exercise. The exercise is the benefit. So it doesn't matter if there's a zero up there. It doesn't matter if there's 10 people up there. It doesn't matter if there's 100 people up there. Just go through the exercise. You will grow as an individual just going through the exercise.
Right, I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that your personal struggle as well. So it gives people the confidence that if you can, you did it before, right? So it gives them the
Yeah.
confidence that if Larry can do it, then I can do it too, right? If he was so afraid of camera, if he did it, I can do it too. So thank you so much for sharing that. Is again, your story is relatable, right? You want to share your story so that people can resonate with your story. They can find themselves in your story. Um, so the other question I want to go back to what I said earlier, like I want to talk about personal branding in particular. So how can someone brand themselves effectively as a podcaster?
I think it's just supporting your message that is the biggest thing. Live your message and demonstrate your message on a daily basis. It's one of the things that really resonated for me was the red hat.
Yeah.
And I always try to get people to find their own red hat. That can be difficult to do, especially when we go to identify exactly, what is my red hat? My red hat was an accident. If we look at the Savannah Bananas, I mean, he wears a yellow suit and a yellow top hat everywhere he goes. That's ridiculous, but it works. And I recently found out that the owner of the Savannah Bananas gets $40,000 per speaking engagement. That's insane. $40,000, and all because he wears a yellow suit. I mean, it's next level. But we have to look at ourselves and go, "Hey, what is my red hat? Hey, what is my Savannah banana? How can I stand out in a crowd? It's a very, very crowded space out there, and we have to look at ourselves and go, "How do I uniquely stand out?" And a lot of times if we try to force that, it doesn't happen. We have to uniquely find where we're at. And I'm working with a client right now actually that's trying to find their red hat, and it can be challenging. But
Yeah.
if we look inside and we continue to show up each and every day, eventually, and I know this isn't very reassuring, but eventually our red hat will show itself. We'll find our unique value proposition. And I kind of deemed a saying when I launched podcasts. I like for my clients to find their unique listening proposition, meaning why would someone listen to your podcast as compared to somebody else's podcast? And it's the same thing in us and our brands each and every day. What is our unique listening proposition? Why would someone listen to me as compared to somebody else? And that can be a challenge. But I think it's a challenge that each and every one of us need to accept and step up and take on head first and find out exactly where our red hat is in our lives.
Yeah, I think that is one of the fundamental questions when it comes to building a personal brand is asking yourself the question, why me? Like why would someone work with me instead of my competitors? Because there are so many people out there who are doing what you are doing exactly what you're doing, offering the same services as you. So why would they choose you? So that's the question. If you don't know the answer as a business owner, then you will not stand out. The last question that I have is, of course, to talk about the future, So since you're one of the pioneers in the industry and you are speaking on all the, like big stages and
Sure.
conferences, and you're working with so many clients, podcasters, where do you see us going in the next few years?
Man, I think AI is going to have a significant influence on how we create content going forward. AI has really stepped on the scene since November of last year when ChatGPT came out and was available to us, and I've seen tremendous impact in that arena. And honestly, for me personally, that's been my primary speaking point. I've kind of moved into an arena where that's all I speak about is AI. So I think if we as creators aren't aware of where AI is and how we can leverage AI to either streamline our processes or influences how we're creating content, I think we're going to get left behind. So I would definitely recommend that everybody listening finds a way to leverage AI in their creative process.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so my question is how?
Well, it depends. I mean, honestly, it depends on how we're trying to do it and how our content is being created. If we're a podcaster, we can leverage AI to help us come up with ideas and concepts for our podcast. We can even have it come up with scripts for
Okay.
our podcast. We can have it come up with scripts for our videos. We can reference AI, and now that we have access, I mean, ChatGPT obviously is one of the front runners in the AI game. Now that ChatGPT has access to the internet, we can leverage a variety of topics to figure out how we could plan our content going forward. What are some of the most prominent questions that are being asked for our particular niche? Podcasters talk about a variety of different things. It's a wide open space out there. But regardless of where we're at in our podcasting journey, we could always reference back to AI and ask for what are people looking for in our niche. Regardless of what we're talking about, we can dig into that a little bit deeper, and it's pretty straightforward and pretty easy. And it opens up an opportunity for us to not only continue creating content, but creating content that's relevant to people that are consuming content. And that's absolutely critical in everything we do. We can create a podcast or we can create a reel or a TikTok or whatever it is. But if people aren't looking for the content that we're creating, then it's not going to be consumed. So we can start leveraging AI to find out exactly what is the type of content that's being consumed and how do we create it so that we can leverage our brand to continue moving forward.
I love that. Yeah, that is so useful. It's always like, it's good to do your own market research, like really know what your ideal clients really want, what they are looking for, like actively looking up, searching for an answer. So thank you so much for sharing all the tips and all the insights and all the stories. I can talk to you for hours. So now tell my listeners where they can find you online if they want to get to know you more, work with you, or listen to your podcast, be your own boss.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, one of the best ways to reach me is on Instagram, the Larry Roberts on Instagram. Follow me over there, shoot me a DM, and I'll be more than happy to chat with you and help you out any way that I can.
Awesome. All right, guys, I hope you learned a lot from our guest today. If you have any question, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave us a comment below and make sure you visit the show note below and find all the resources that we have for you today. And thank you so much for listening and watching. I will always leave you the same way as leave you every other episode. Keep showing up. Success doesn't show up for you until you show up and pursue your own success. Thank you for listening to the Show Up Show with me, Joanne Chan. If you want to create more confidence, visibility, and authority in your business, send me a message on Instagram at Joanne Chan Coaching. DM me the word show up, and I will send you my free signature training, Visibility Creates Possibilities, that you can watch right away to start exploding your visibility today.